More of our learning is caught than taught. So how can I demonstrate in front of them how they can interact with somebody in a transformative way, and they're catching that in the moment instead of being taught that? We cannot read minds, that we've not been gifted with that, but we can communicate our thoughts. And that's better than reading minds because it's clear and concise in most cases.
Hello and welcome back to ReedFlections, a podcast on life, leadership, and learning. I am Art Calderon here with Reed Niffler. Reed is the CEO of a growing global company. He's a father and a husband, a local leader. And we've been talking about a lot of things, Reed, over the past several months. Episodes 1 through 4, priorities. Then we jumped into habits, know your purpose, start your journey. Currently, we are talking in this segment about be present on purpose. And today is transformational meetings. Kind of exciting. I like the title. Everybody wants meetings to matter, right? I don't think a whole lot of people are excited about meetings. But talk about this transformational meeting and why it's critical to living your life on purpose.
Well, and transformational meetings are typically a smaller setting or one-on-one, right? Here, we're meeting one-on-one. I'm sure it's transformed your life. You can't probably walk on a public street without people recognizing you.
Oh, our tens of fans.
Yes, if your tens of fans are probably just stopping you everywhere you go. And that's been a transformational meeting for you. This podcast has been clearly, and it's transformed your life.
Indeed.
But at the same time, as I think ultimately it's critical to living in those transformational meetings. And if we all look back in our lives, right, there was something that happened transformationally and what do I mean by transformational? We'll break that down first. That means in a meeting, there was some information that we forever live our lives or abide by, right? And I remember one early one when I was just my first job, actually. I was 14 years old and I was working at a construction site and I was building brick block walls. And so I would call it a one-on-one with my manager. If he's screaming at me directly, I consider that a one-on-one. You know, that's typically how that worked. He was yelling right at me and it was calling me by name. And then he had some colorful language in there. And so it was directed right at me. And I consider that a one-on-one. And as I was walking away from I was a laborer. So my goal was to bring things down from the street, basically down to the job site, which was, a basement, a foundation, a hole, and then likewise go back up and take things that need to be brought up. And so in the mornings, we would typically bring things down to set up for the day. And so then I'd bring something down, and that's where he gave me my one-on-one. He said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm bringing your stuff down." He said, "But you're walking up empty-handed." I said, "Okay." He said, "You're doubling your steps as a result of that." And I thought at that moment, I said, that's brilliant, right? I literally cut my steps in half, even though that was my one-on-one with some transformational language. What I took away from that, and I still apply today, is saying, if I'm going one direction or the other, what can I be doing? And so use every moment that was a transformational meeting for me, where it said, okay, if you're going one direction, what can you take with you? If you're coming back, what can you take with you? And so even to this day, as I'm at home and I'm walking up the stairs to go deliver something, I'm saying, what can I bring down that needs to come downstairs? And so the same thing happens. And to me, that was a transformational meeting, is saying something that in that moment I took away and applied to my life. And that is by definition, a transformational meeting is something that we remember, that we can impact and change our lives as a result.
So that helped with just like efficiency and in your life. Now, he probably didn't realize it, right? He didn't realize, well, this is going to be a really transformational meeting I'm going to have with this kid. But you took that principle and you're able to apply it going forward in your life.
And in his case, and I think in many cases, if we're the leader in that environment, we're saying, I want you to transform while I'm watching you. Instead, a transformational meeting for me at this stage in my life is saying, I want you to transform your life. I'm not here as a leader to just say, hey, do this for the benefit of work. And why is that important? Part of the purpose of this podcast and really the platform that I'm building here is so that we can create our different culture, right? I think if you look at the evolution of work, right, it was before in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it was really command and control. And then, basically your leader said it, you did it, and they would, admonish you. Very directive. Just like my experience at 14. They would admonish you if you didn't do what they asked you to do. And then now, as we've seen in the last 20 and 30 years, we've seen kind of, hey, don't say anything about my work. I'm doing what I feel like doing, and it's appropriate. And to me, that isn't transformational either, right? I mean, people did a fear-based work environment where your leader would, tell you what to do. Now it's kind of laissez-faire. Whatever I feel like doing is more than enough, and you're compensating me accordingly. But really, where do I see the work is going, and why is this platform important? Because we are, I believe, in our best self when we're working towards a purpose. So my goal is to say, hey, clarify purpose and then align with others who have a similar purpose. And ultimately, if we can accomplish that through our Transform Through Purpose platform, the book, and really this life leadership and learning podcast to say, hey, let's align, let's clarify each other's purpose. And then how can we align? And then how can we help each other accomplish that? Then we're truly transforming each other and the culture at large. And so that's really the objective of the platform. And so that is how I think we really should work forward, looking at saying, now, it's not just like, as you mentioned at the beginning of the question, which was he didn't realize I was transformed. That's really the platform. We're trying to say transform each other and recognize this could be a transformational moment, and this meeting could be transformational. What do we need to do to make it a transformational meeting?
Is that why meetings in the workplace generally get a bad rap? No one is, oh, great, we got a day booked up with meetings, and they look forward to that. Is that what they're lacking, or what is it? Why are meetings such a bad rap?
Well, and many times it's just transactional, right? It's not transformational.
Uh-huh.
And I think both parties have kind of diluted down to transactional, right? I mean, and what's a transaction? Let's say we go to a grocery store. That could be just a transaction,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that could be just, hey, I got to scan my groceries and then literally by the term transact,
Mm-hmm.
meaning pay for that open opportunity. However, it's a matter of perspective because it could be transformational,
Mhm.
right? I've been with a waiter and or an environment where I'm at a service industry and I'm saying, how can I transform the life of this individual?
Hmm.
And especially if it's a smaller setting or I'm there with my wife and I'm saying, okay, this person's having a bad day. This could be easily construed as a transaction. How can I transform? And so, one of the things that was specific to that is I remember I have roundtable lunches at work. So basically, every 6 months, I'm going with every single employee in a group of 8 or less to a restaurant on typically Mondays and Thursdays, and investing in them. However, what the group doesn't see is that wait staff sees me. They have a routine schedule just like all of us, and they see me each and every day. And so, last round, we were at a little local kind of, I would say, breakfast, coffee, brunch place, and I had a very consistent waitress. And I saw that, she enjoyed getting to know every one of her customers, but I was there frequently and it was transformational. And so while I was there, she began to build this relationship, et cetera. And I thought, how can I transform? And, everybody needs a little interjection of humor. And, I'm very, very funny. I have to hold it
Oh,
back. I have to tamp it down because
yes.
otherwise there'll be no
Oh,
transformational progress in
it's a
those things.
blessing and a curse.
Yes, and more of a blessing than a curse. It's a curse you can't think of another punchline to come back at me, but that's on you, not on me. At which point, but in that transformation moment, I thought, okay, I can transform her day and her energy, right? Because whatever energy we typically have in that meeting, we carry to the next meeting. So if we leave a transactional meeting
Uh-huh.
and it drains us and takes away from
Right.
that, we leave and say, what just happened?
Uh-huh.
What did I miss? Where was it at? So we can make it transformational. And the easiest thing to transform is their energy, right? We can put a smile on their face, we can change the behavior, and they can
Mhm.
bring that to the next meeting, right? No different than a individual that has a bad day at work. They can transact that onto their family. But if they have a great day at work and they leave there feeling productive, they can bring that energy to their family. And so I thought the same thing in that waitress scenario, saying, how can I transform the relationship that was there? And so I went through that whole 6 month period of time having lunch, and then my kids wanted to go to this restaurant. And typically by the end, I'm like, I've been there 1,000 times. I've had enough any other restaurant,
Yeah.
and they decided to go there. Well, this particular waitress had told me at my last meeting, which was about 3 or 4 weeks earlier, that she was excited because it was Christmas time, and for Christmas Eve, or maybe the day before, or that Saturday before, whatever it was, she was going to be the Grinch. And so I thought, oh boy,
At work?
at work. She was going to dress up because they're going to let her dress up. And
Yeah.
she was quite an outgoing personality and wanted to dress up. And she was there. And so then here we come with my family. And of course, I'm the only person she's seen. She hasn't seen my family. But in that case, she really was,
She was dressed up like the Grinch?
she was literally dressed up as the Grinch and super excited about it. And so in that case, literally the week before, my oldest daughter's a second grade teacher, and she was the Grinch because for her second graders.
Uh-huh.
And so then I said, I got two Grinches here. Who's the real Grinch? Right. And of course, they're both bubbly personalities,
Uh-huh,
ironically, that chose to be the Grinch. But that was a transformational moment that
uh-huh.
transformed our family. And it's something that we'll forever remember, but it also connected that audience and ultimately lifted the spirits of the people.
Well, you saw a person, right? And when we transact, we need to see, hey, whoever I'm dealing with, whether it's in a meeting, at a workplace, or having lunch, the person in front of me is a real person. Maybe they had a good day, maybe a bad day. Something's going on in their life. How can I affect that in a positive way? Now, talk about a time where you're usually the transformer, right? You're usually, because you head a lot of meetings and you got that personality that will take charge in a room. But talk about a time a little more recently, besides when you were 14, that a meeting helped transform you.
Yeah. And I think if we look at the structure of transformation, information can just be information, but it can be transformational because of a relationship. And so, how do
Hmm,
we
hmm.
structure a relationship? And so,
Well, it's got to be about that relationship, right?
it
It can't
has to
just
be
be delivering information.
transformation happens in a relationship, right?
Hmm.
We need somebody that's empathetic and they care. And so, as I look back, there's three things that I interject into literally every time I meet someone. I'm thinking these three things, or even directly asking them my questions. Who are you? Meaning, ultimately, you're not just a breathing human. There is
Hmm.
some element to you that is different and uniquely. You're created on purpose for a purpose. So I'm trying to understand that. Who are you? The second, why are you here? Ultimately, what led to this opportunity for us to meet one on one
Hmm.
right now that could be there? And then third, what are you going to do from here? Right. And so, something that was transformational for me recently is I was meeting actually with an individual that I highly respect. And in that conversation, I had left work and then I was having a lunch meeting and then I was going back to work. Well, as I mentioned before, in a work environment, I'm the leader, right? And so my objective is to clarify vision and strategy and
Hmm.
purpose. Then at lunch, it's very difficult for me to transition from being in a leadership to
Right,
being a supportive role.
right.
And the role had not been clarified, right?
Mm.
And this individual, I believe, was meeting with me to be empathetic. At the same time as I knew this person, this particular individual, had an environment where they're not around other leaders that can sharpen them in many ways.
Mm.
And they needed me to be empathetic, not a vision and strategy and project management scenario like I'm typically a leader, but empathy
Ah,
that would listen and encourage, right?
they didn't need you to go in there and fix it. They needed you to listen.
Right. And so this was transformational in that moment to say, I need to be able to create pause when I
Hmm.
look at my calendar so that I can have transformation. And so, and I'll get back to the story in a second because this is a relevant tangent here. But I remember a time when I read a story about Abraham Lincoln, and he was there in the midst of the Civil War. And obviously, the country hung in the balance. There's opposing vantage points, opposing sides, and so he invited one of his long-standing friends from Illinois to come to the White House. And he said, I just need someone to sit down and empathetically listen. He didn't say that, but that was the context of the
Hmm.
story. And so he said, here's my challenges. Here's where I'm at with the Civil War. I have these leaders and these generals that are doing their thing. I have these combatants that are on the other side fighting that. How do I bring everybody together? And he went through his side of the perspective for hours. And ultimately, his friend said to him, he said, Abe, I think you know the answer. It's within you. Now, what had been happening all the way through that point is everyone was telling him how he should respond.
Right.
Everyone was giving them their perspective and information. And what I realized was this was a powerful story that was just a hours or 3 hour segment that was documented in the book that was transformational for him. Not because they told him what to do,
Hmm.
but because this person listened empathetically to draw that answer out. Because if you look around Abraham Lincoln, I'm sure countless hours he's getting briefed on the war. He was getting briefed on these external circumstances, and he's in a disposition of leadership, and he has to show strength in this critical time of the country, and he broke that down. Yet, here was someone, because of their listening and empathy, could transform. And so, go back to my story. That's what I recognized. It was my time to say, wait a minute, I have to create pause so that in this environment, this person needed me to listen to their struggles and
Hmm.
challenges and their processes because they had not had people around them that could empathetically listen. They were all opining for direction and purpose and even communicating that. And so I recognized in that transformation moment, I need to recognize, okay, this is my time to be empathetic
Hmm.
listener
Hmm.
because I'm not responsible for this individual's performance and they're struggling to find places they can be in private comfortable with
Uh-huh.
communicating what's going on in the day to day and be transformed so they can go back and serve yet again in a different way. And so that was a transformational moment for me to say Step outside of your role as a leader, creating vision,
Uh-huh.
strategy, and purpose, and recognize who is this person in front of me, right? Understanding who they are. Why are they here? Why do they ask for this meeting? You ask for this meeting. And then what are they intending to do with this? And I had blown right through that, which is what I typically do in a work environment, to not recognize, wait a minute, this meeting is different than all the rest.
Uh-huh.
They needed me to be the empathetic listener instead of the visionary leader
Uh-huh.
that I just left that environment. And so that was transformational to say every meeting's different, right? Every time, who is this person? Because transformation happens when we're understood. And then transformation happens when we recognize, where are we now? Where is this time? When we intersect now. It's not when I was 14, as you mentioned before. It's where I'm at now in my
Mhm.
late 40s. And then ultimately, what happens from here? That's where transformation begins. And that meeting is a reminder of me that I should be always looking at who is that individual. And that's how I structure these podcasts, to be honest. Who is our listener?
Mhm.
Right. And that question came as the podcast was coming together. I believe it's someone that is looking to transform their life.
Okay.
Right. We are right here, and they're going to do that through life, leadership, and learning. Their life is going to be transformed in leadership and learning. And why leadership? Because they can transform other lives.
Mhm.
Right? As leaders, our objective is not just to transform our lives, but transform the lives of those who've entrusted us as their leader.
Even if it's just someone you have influence on, right?
Influence, right?
Maybe not a direct report necessarily, but we all have people around us that we could influence.
Absolutely. And, I may not know them, but they can be known.
Right.
Why? Why can the listener be known by me? Because I've lived that life. If we're drawing in the appropriate audience for this podcast, they will identify with some of the things that we're sharing. Right? They'll say, you know what, I've been in that moment. I've been in a transactional meeting, and I want to be in a transformational meeting. Just like Reed said, he's gotten a one-on-one from in
Right.
construction, right? Or he's failed in these certain areas, and I've also failed there. And so how can I take this conversation, this podcast, and say, transform my way out of it so that I'm not living a transactional life without any purpose? How can I focus on my priorities? How can I structure my purpose statement? How can I then start that journey? And how can I live in those transformational meetings where I'm transferring that purpose onto someone else that they can make progress going forward?
Okay, so a lot of us have to plan meetings. They have to plan communication with others, either one on one or in groups. What are some tips to be able to make those uh, change them from just being transactional interactions?
Yeah. And so I think sometimes is curate that to a group of people that can be and are willing to be transformed. So a lot of that is, who do you invite to the meeting?
Okay.
Right. And so, each and every week I have a meeting to prepare my meetings, ironically. And so that's with my support staff. And I'll be very intentional about all this calendar for that week and the months ahead. And I'll say, invite this person, not this person, invite that person,
Mhm.
not this person. And the reason is because sometimes if you have too many people, it's not productive,
Right.
right? And sometimes if you have too few people, it's not productive.
Yeah.
And so it's transformational.
And if
Then
there was other people there, that would have just the communication couldn't have happened.
I believe as humans, we are the most effective with interdependency. Because if somebody's independent, they don't
Hmm.
need anybody else,
Right.
right? They're not going to accomplish as much. If you're dependent,
Hmm.
right? How do you really make progress? It's that interdependency. How does interdependent dependency happen? It is when we value the unique purpose we were created for and we interlock together, right? As much as I don't want to admit it, Art, I'm interdependent with you on this podcast. I mean,
With me,
I just have to say that for the audience. They want to believe that.
believe every minute of it.
But ultimately,
Right. You
even
have
though,
to depend on other people to get
of
through
course,
life. Yeah.
right? You're an empathetic listener, right? Which I don't want to admit publicly, but I guess now it's recorded, so it happens, right? And ultimately, you understand what I'm trying to accomplish with this
Right.
as well. And then likewise, then I can provide information
Hmm.
based upon the way you provide questions. And so we're interdependent, and that transforms the understanding of the audience versus me just up here sharing ideology on my own.
Yeah. It would be a lonely life for people to be so independent than someone who's chooses to not have any sort of the interdependent relationships, and that would be a lonely life, and I can't see how that would be very productive long term.
Yeah, and part of it is, why do we not get to a point of transformational interdependency? And I think that's because people let us down,
Mhm.
right? Because we have this focusing, if I just did it myself then, right? And they're going to let us
Right,
down.
right.
But ultimately, if we look back at the moments in our lives, they were not alone,
Uh-huh.
right? Someone, even if we had and you're a tennis player all on the court by yourself, many of them walk off and say, I could not done this without my coach and my fans.
Right,
There's an interdependent relationship, even between that
right.
coach and that player in that case. And those are the moments of great achievement are those of interdependence. And so maybe you're living a life and you're saying, I need a transformational meeting. And ultimately, however, I got to do it on my own. We should really seek interdependence in that small group setting that ultimately would allow for transformation to truly happen.
Now, talk about in those relationships and in those meetings, talk about the importance of communication and how important it is to be able to communicate and receive communication in a transactional meeting,
Yeah. And I think
a
this is where
transformational meeting.
transformational
Yeah.
meaning, not transactional,
Mhm.
right? So where I've seen the world breakdown is in communication over the last really 20, 30 years, right? As we look at it, it's because we get over communicated to,
Oh
but
yeah.
not with.
Yeah.
This social media era just inundates us with it. I mean, our screen time is at record highs. We get people telling us, telling us, telling us. And there's a lot of subtlety in that, right? Because we're absorbing information just in this podcast. We have tens and tens of listeners. And ultimately, I'm using your line, Art. Each and every second they join us, tens and tens
Uh-huh.
do. But ultimately, in that case, it's communicating in mass
Uh-huh.
and it's not interrelational. Transformation happens one to one. And so, in that one to one, we're used to communicating in mass, right? We're used to making platitudes that would cover a broad audience. We're used to being non offensive to
Hmm.
super large groups. However, transformation happens when we're direct. And so, this is something we become very poor at.
Hmm.
Just as I go back to my one on one, where I got that direct transformational information from my manager, if he would have said, everybody needs to pick up the pace, right? That was information like, yeah, that guy needs to pick up the pace. I would have not
Not
taken,
me.
not me, it's that other guy,
Yeah.
it's that other person, because I'm the hardest worker here. Instead, he was direct at me. And so, in that, how do we transform? It's with direct communication. And so, we should say, what do they directly need to hear? And on either side of that, we need to say in the beginning, why, right? I want to benefit for your benefit. I want to provide direct communication.
Mhm.
Then we provide the direct communication and we don't discount it. We don't say, I mean, you don't have to, but we say, here's the direct
Uh-huh.
conversation and here's why it will transform
Here's
you.
the
Here's the
expectations. Yeah.
expectations and here's why it will transform you. Right. And so we'll go back to the scenario, an example I used earlier in the podcast, which was my manager came to me and said, hey, here's why it will save you time. So when we communicate to the benefit of the transformed,
It can't just be for me.
nope,
It has to be for the person
that's right.
I'm
So
interacting
when we're
with.
communicating, we need direct communication. And I've seen it to be the most effective when it's to the benefit of the transformed.
Okay.
If I'm saying you will benefit me by doing this, people are less likely to do that.
Mhm.
But if I say your life will be better, you will be transformed, your purpose will be have a much higher likelihood of being achieved when these things happen.
But how do you know what they need? How do you know this person here I'm going to interact with and I know they need, and so I need to direct my communication
And it
to
goes
that?
back to who are you, right? I understand them, I listen to them, right? Through intuitive interaction, I'm listening to them. Why are we meeting, right? Why have we our time together and
Hmm.
joined in this moment? What has happened here? Why are we here together? Many times they're seeking counsel, or they have a moment together, or there is a moment together, right? And it depends on that audience, right? So, and it might be somebody that we have a 5-year-old and they don't know why they're there because, well, I'm driving them. But I'm saying, in my case, saying, if I don't know why they're here, I'm going to find a way that I can invest. A 5-year-old doesn't know why they're here. They're just, because you told me, Dad.
Uh-huh.
So I'm there. I'm saying, how can I transform them? How can I transform their perspective? And sometimes it might be as simple saying, hey, be courteous. Be courteous to whomever, right? More of our learning is caught than taught. So, how can I demonstrate in front of them, just like back to that waitress example, how they can interact with somebody in a transformative way and they're catching that in the moment instead of being taught that in the moment? So, that's the second piece. And then the third is, what are they going to do with the information from here, right? Where do we go from here? And so then I can correct afterward and say, hey, remember when I was with that waitress and I brightened their day so they could transform that energy to the other table? How can you carry that forward when you leave this meeting?
Mhm.
This transformational meeting, how can you transform someone else, right? And that's how we pass that along to have transformation. And we do that through communication, right? We cannot read minds, that we've not been gifted with that, but we can communicate our thoughts. And that's better than reading minds because it's clear and concise in most
Yeah.
cases.
Yeah. Well, that ends our time together. Once again, we've talked about something that we can apply to our lives daily. Moments, specifically moments of being transformational. How you can transform others, and you can yourself be transformed through these moments. Thank you all very much for listening. Thank you, Reed, for sharing with us. We encourage you to share our podcast with your friends and family. We're going to continue next time with being present, but this time making the most of your minutes. So we're narrowing it down to minutes here. Until then, I'm Art Calderon. Be purposeful.
Now, if you are having transactional meetings, that's on you. It's your goal to make them transformational meetings. How do you do that? Know who you're meeting with, know why you're meeting with them, and know what they're going to do with that transformational information. Then orient to that. Provide transformational communication that will change that world that they live in from there going forward. Whether it's a conversation they have with you, something the demonstrators see that you're doing, if you're beginning to transform yourself and others, you're living a life on purpose.